Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Sher, and it's time again. Well, here's your panel: Tyrone Keys, Andrew Langer, Mary Koch, and Dan Rodricks. We're glad to see you. We have an awful lot to talk about today. Now, you'll remember we began last week's square off with breaking news. 3 students were shot outside of Carver Vocational Technical High School in West Baltimore. A father and mother, listen up, a father and mother drove their 15-year-old son to school to settle a beef. City police report the 3 of them started assaulting an unidentified minor. The teen with mom and dad pulls out a handgun, pistol whips the boy. Then their son exchanges words with 2 other students, pulled out the same gun, and he started shooting. One of the 2 others pulls his gun and fires. When the gun smoke clears, 3 teens had been shot. Fortunately, none critical. You separate these pages. Mom and dad, by the way, have been charged with participating in the assault. Both ordered held without bail. The 2 15-year-old shooters will be charged as adults. Kids with a beef used to settle things with their hands. Now there are guns everywhere. Mary, you're our lead off. Go ahead.
I don't want to make light, but that's sort of the idea that it was mom and dad there sort of kicks Richie Vatz's theory in the face about the family. But in any event,
explain, Mary, explain that, because I refer.
He always makes a point about saying that, you know, a lot of what happens in the world that is negative is because kids don't have parents. And I think, you know, don't have a father in the household. And I think a lot of what happens in the world that is negative is because we've stopped trying to resolve issues and listen to other people and be reasonable. And we've gone extreme in everything that we do. There seems to be an extreme reaction. And then when, you know, literally in this case, when the smoke clears, like, does anybody step back and say, or think to themselves, like, especially the parents, wow, that was a reaction that was not merited? I mean, I don't even know what these people are thinking.
Well, you know, Mary, the thing is, it looks like no one, well, not no one, but these individuals certainly were not able to just project a couple of moves down the chessboard to say, okay, what are the likely outcomes of me taking my child to a shootout? Okay, what could possibly go wrong? So there is a total lack of emotional intelligence here, and I think we're living in an amalgam of idiocracy and a clockwork orange. This thing is just getting very, very bizarre. It's unexplainable.
All right, Dan, I saw you tap your shoulder. What do you want to say?
What I'd be curious about in here as a reporter looking into the background of the father and mother, is there any red flag there that would show you that, hey, these folks have used guns before? Maybe, I don't know. I'm just speculating. But as a reporter, that's what you do. You go and take a look. I would wonder if they've resolved issues before using a gun. Was this the first time? You know, I'd want to know that. But it's like Mary said, it is. I hear this frequently, that the absence of the father is what's causing all these problems with young men, especially in Baltimore and other places like that. And I think it's the quality of the parent. It isn't that you have parents around. Some parents are quite abusive. Others are just bad influences. You know, it's the quality of the parent, not just having the parent around.
I don't think we've ever had a story where parents, as you said,
I can't think of one.
Have their kid with a to a shootout. Go ahead, Dan.
I mean, and I'm just to say, I mean, statistics the data shows that you know, they're one of the defining characteristics in a lot of these situations is the absence of the male role model in the household. That doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions to the data, but setting all that aside, you know, to me, it comes back to, we have reverted to a state in which there are almost, and this is true, to get to what Mary was saying about extremism, there's the counterpoint, or the portion of that is tribalism and this idea of settling scores and settling beefs. I've, talked to folks and heard of other folks who, in there are communities in which this is a part of it. If someone goes and attacks you and you're a teenager, well, then you need to go and settle that score. Be a man and settle that score. In an environment in which we are at this point where these baser instincts seem to be taking over, that's where this tragedy happens. To Dan's point, real quick, the other question that I would ask is, where were the school resource officers? Where was law enforcement? How can all of these people be in this school environment armed and this violence occurring without some kind of enforcement response almost immediately?
Well,
greatly.
didn't this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't this occur outside of the actual school building?
Yeah.
And
But
then
still, I mean,
the other thing is, aren't the school police required to keep any firearms locked up off of their person? So there would have been some time, but even if they wanted to respond armed, they would have had to go and get the weapon and then come back to the scene.
Well, I just want to add one thing to that. And just my bigger point is that we cannot rely on police or school resources or anyone else in these kinds of situations. I mean, to some extent, we have to rely on people acting reasonably and within the bounds of the law, because we can't expect that when these kinds of things happen, you have one school police officer or two school police officers and a school with 1,000 students and people who are coming off the property onto the property. It's just not realistic. I will tell you that this is what's really sad about my first reaction to what you said, was that the parents practiced some restraint because they started out by pistol whipping and not shooting. So how sad is that I considered that to be some personal restraint?
Well, Mary, the other thing, as a former first responder, you're right. When seconds count, we're minutes away at least. So, you got to rely on folk to use some, again, emotional intelligence.
Well, the city police, they have a technological device called Shot Spotter. It alerts them to people shooting, and it alerted them to Carver. They located, when they got there, several 9mm and 40 caliber shell casings at the scene, much of the event captured on video cameras. And Mayor Brandon Scott calls the participation of the parents a despicable example of parents facilitating the escalation of everyday conflicts between young people into reckless gun violence, endangering innocent lives. He says we cannot tolerate this. Dan?
Well, I don't want to get into a debate about guns. It's just that I'm kind of sensitive to this subject because of recent news. Is that why is this gun even available to a kid or these parents? And that's why I would want to know about what the whether the record shows that these parents, either one, the parent, the mother or father, or both of them, have a gun in the background. We don't take guns away from people who've shown they shouldn't have them, who's demonstrated that they shouldn't have them. And so there's more of them available. Also, to Andrew's point, over at Johns Hopkins, where they study gun policy all the time, they talk about the contagion of retribution, of retaliation.
Right.
It's a key ingredient. They think it's in 40 or 50% of the shootings that occur in Baltimore. That contagion of retaliation is there, and that's looks like what happened here,
without a doubt.
And Richard, Richard, to your point, the fact that the police have something that identifies when shots are fired answers the question of the fact that it's not identified till shots are fired. Right. By the time shots are fired, somebody is potentially, injured or dead. And so that's the first thing.
Well, that's why I mentioned prevention. That what I'm talking about is on the prevention side of gun violence. You can take guns away from people who shouldn't have them. We don't do that.
And I agree with you 1,000%. And I think that a lot of to the extent that people listen to it, a lot of the rhetoric around guns and all, I mean, literally, if you listen after these school shootings happen, there are a lot of people, a lot of politicians, a lot of people in authority who get on and say, well, if people are armed with guns, these things wouldn't happen. So in the public domain, by people who are supposed to be responsible, you get this reaction that it's okay to arm yourself in anticipation or in response to an aggression. And so that's a problem too.
All right, we have a lot to talk about. We also want to get to the Middle East and the rise in this country and around the world of anti-Semitism. But first, we'll take a break. Here's the voice of Square Off to thank our sponsors, Howard Mallison. Howard?
Thank you, Rich. You know, for fine dining, special occasions, or just watching sports in their sports bars, Pappas Restaurant should be your #1 choice. Enjoy a Pappas crab cake, or as Richard calls it, the Fab Cake, which is Oprah's favorite. We're one of the many delicious choices on the Pappas menu. Plus, Pappas ships their crab cakes all over the country, and with 4 locations, including their newest sports bar and restaurant in Bel Air. See you at Pappas. And Leading Edge Auto Body and Mechanical Repair want you to know that the insurance companies cannot tell you where to take your car. Richard and his family have been taking their cars to Leading Edge for years. They work on all makes and models, and they offer free pickup anywhere in the Baltimore area. Call Leading Edge at 410-433-6433 or visit them at 5807 Falls Road in the heart of Mount Washington. They make your car look and run like new again. Back to you, Rich.
And by the way, we'll be taking Annabelle's car to Leading Edge tomorrow morning for some mechanical work. Jeff Siegel and his guys, it's a great, great place. Now to the Israeli war against Hamas, in retaliation of Hamas's surprise attack on October 7th, during which 1,400 Israelis were killed, many more injured, more than 230 hostages taken. Since the war began, anti-Semitism has been rampant on college campuses everywhere. Examples: Harvard, Cornell, Columbia, Tulane, Emory, Stanford, Maryland, University of Pennsylvania, Cooper Union, just to name a few. Cornell University cancels its classes to acknowledge the extraordinary stress its campus has been under since one of its students has made violent anti-Semitic threats against Jewish people at the college. Who wants to kick this off?
I'll kick it off, if that's okay, because I don't know about anybody else. I have 2 kids in college right now, and I attended a meeting of Jewish parents for William and Mary, which is my alma mater, because William and Mary, which has not had quite the level of anti-Semitic incidents of other college campuses, nevertheless had a very strange incident in which a brick or some object was thrown through the window of the president's house with a note wrapped around it. We still don't know what the note said, but the president's husband is Jewish. Having talked to my daughter and heard from others, there's a real abiding concern on the part of parents for what's happening on these campuses, and a concern that not enough is being done to protect kids. This is, I know for William and Mary's sake, the college police and some folks in the administration are very much on target here, but there is a real concern that students are being targeted, that they don't feel safe. What we can do as parents to make our kids feel safer is important, obviously, but there is a legitimate feeling on college campuses all around America, not just the ones that Richard mentioned.
The Patrick Dye, who was a 21-year-old junior at Cornell, was arrested, and he's been charged federally with publishing online posts to bring an assault rifle to school to kill and injure, he says, Jewish people on campus, starting with shooting up the school's kosher dining hall. Mary, what do you think?
So I just wonder, since 2016, there has been an uptick for sure in white nationalism, and there have been people in power who have advocated white nationalism. And no one will forget, the march where men with torches said, Jews will not replace us. So I think that people who harbor these thoughts and who have these beliefs utilize what's happening in Israel to inflame and to give
Mary, it is not white nationalists who are on these campuses doing these things.
Yeah,
You
this
say
thing,
that.
Faculty members.
these protests that we're seeing are pretty diverse. Dai, for example, is of Asian descent. So this is coming out of all quarters. And let's just focus on the disturbing kind of trend here. You go back to the 30s, they had this group called the Bund, which
Yes.
was an American kind of group of sympathizers to the Nazi and Third Reich regime. And it's really interesting that this is kind of an extension of the first subject we talked about, which is there's this rush to an emotional conclusion without looking at any of the facts. There are no gray areas that anyone's willing to entertain. It's Steelers versus Ravens down the line, pretty much. And the rhetoric is reminiscent of the 1940s in Paris. You've got people spray painting Stars of David on the doors of Jewish residences. Now, this is getting disturbing, and we're going down the road that we've been down before, but it seems like the college campuses are pretty much in favor of taking this in the direction that we moved away from in the late 40s, or we thought we did at least.
Wait, hold on, Mary, I want to hear from Dan.
I
Please.
just, I've noticed that all the incidents that we're talking about, most of them involve young people, college campuses. These are people in their 20s, right? And when I look at this tableau of young white men mainly, but in this case, there's diversity in the anti-Semitism. I wonder, like, what happened? We were told, or we wanted to believe that this kind of prejudice was going to go away with the generations, you know, that as society became more diverse, as there was more interracial marriage, more interethnic marriage, you know, more of the falling down of the boundaries between ethnic groups in America, that this would go away with the generation. You know, young people are going to be more enlightened and more accepting. And, you know, it doesn't just happen. You know, you have to teach it. You have to teach people to love each other, to not to go the other way. And it's not done. We're talking about parenting in the first segment. I would say part of this is partly a lack of parenting. It's also the poisonous stuff that people read and see on the internet too. It's another whole dynamic.
So I guess what I'm sort of surprised at is, and maybe I shouldn't use the phrase white with nationalism, but really all of this sort of, you know, what I consider to be in essence Nazism has really been on the forefront since Trump ran for president. And it has.
So Mary, hold on. This goes back much further.
Andrew,
but you can't lay this at Trump, Richard. I mean, the problem.
Let me finish my thought.
Okay,
let her
yes,
finish.
Of course.
Relax.
It's those things that happen, whether they were caused by him or not, have gained mainstream acceptance. I mean, there is mainstream acceptance of a lot of these things. And so why are people surprised that now kids who are influenced, who are raised in houses where parents think this is completely appropriate?
None of these people are Trump supporters, Mary. And that's the problem. They're
What?
not.
What do you mean they're not Trump supporters?
Let me dial it back. When you have a professor in Colorado in 2001 saying that the 9/11 was caused to the death of the little Himmlers in the Twin Towers, where you have anti-Jewish sentiment masked as anti-Zionist sentiment pervading academia for 50 years, this is the end result on college campuses. When kids are being taught to hate Israel because Israel's an apartheid state, which it is not, this is what happens when these attacks happen. This is not levied at Donald Trump or Trumpism.
Well, I mean, hate crimes
the
have
folks
gone
who
up.
are ripping down posters in New York are not Donald Trump
300%.
supporters.
Hate crimes have shot way up. I mean, the FBI National Crime Index all indicates the number of hate crimes being reported in the United States is tripled, doubled. I don't know what the number is. I can go look it up for you quickly. That's on recent years. That's
okay. Let's stay on it. We're meandering.
I'm
Yes.
not.
Now, I want to know if anyone here is
clear.
is familiar with Professor Russell Rickard. Okay, Russell Rickard is a person of color. He is anything but a Trump supporter. He said that he thought what took place with regard to Hamas going into Israel was exhilarating. He championed this thing. So I think we do ourselves a disservice when we go back to 2016 and pretend that this started then.
I'm not saying
Obviously,
that.
that's
You're
not.
There's been a
you are
surge
not
of it since
listening
then.
to my point.
Okay.
My point is not that it started in 2016. My point is that there was a whole base of people in this country who were okay with it, and it was all being said out loud and giving permission for people to behave this way. And when people are given permission to behave this way, then they have no problem throwing a brick through a president's window on a college campus, or saying or doing all the things that are done now. It's what we talked about with the parents who take their kid to go retaliate. When you
But the
give
people who are
permission and
doing
say that it's okay, you are allowing all of their prejudices to come out into the open and allowing them to act upon it.
the people who are doing this, Mary, the people who are currently doing this, we're seeing this metastasize across college campuses. So these people weren't even politically engaged in 2016.
You're not listening.
No, I understand. No, Mary, sorry, Richard, you want to hit your gavel? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I want to give Dan a chance to get in here. Mary?
No, I'm sorry. I was Googling hate crimes. I mean, I can't help myself. I mean, we're talking about hate crimes here, anti-Semitism and hate crimes. Hate crimes have surged in the United States over the last 5 years. The FBI, you can go look up the FBI statistics. So
I
agree that this is all. I agree that this has been around forever. I agree anti-Semitism has been around for a long time, but I agree with Mary that there's been a surge in the last 5 years.
Has there been? You got the data right there. Does it say that there has been a surge in anti-Semitic hate crimes in the last 5 years?
Anti-Semitic incidents have increased in the United States 388%, according to preliminary data from this is not FBI. This is the first thing I could grab. This is a CNN report from the Anti-Defamation League, which keeps
for what time frame? What did they mention a time frame?
No, this is just since the Hamas attack and Israel. I'm sorry, this is the first one I had. But I had a conversation. Let me just say, can I just say something? I'm sorry. I just want to throw in one last thing. I talked to a leader of a Jewish organization in Baltimore, a guy I've known for a long time. I said, "What are you working on?" He says, "Anti-Semitism all the time. Takes up all of my time now." And this was a month ago, before the attack on Hamas, on Israel.
Mary, what do you want to say, my dear?
I do want to segue into sort of the comments that were made about I think somebody said something about social media. And I do think that is also a huge part of the problem. No one really wants to sit down and think about why what's going on between Hamas and Israel is occurring. And when you go into it with a mindset and you go into social media, you automatically get moved into your own echo chamber and you never get the real information. You are fed you are like a mushroom in the dark being fed bullshit. I mean, that is what is going on. And so people accept what they read. And I think they have sometimes, honestly, a lack of appreciation of the fact that what they're reading is directed towards what it is their bent.
You know something?
Go ahead.
You raise a really important point, Mary, and it gets to something that Dan said, which is what changed. And we were at a very unique inflection point in America, I would say from about 1968 till about 1985, in which people were coming together and we were working very hard to eliminate racism in America. And we were seeing lots of cross-cultural, cross-racial pollination in very great ways. And then something took hold in which we were told that we needed to separate ourselves and that we needed to define ourselves by identity politics. And there were people who were making great sums of money by pushing forth an identity politics agenda that turned people against one another. And when you no longer have a common frame of reference that America is the greatest nation on earth, that America was founded on principles that were proffered by racists, so we no longer can pull back and hold those principles dear, the things that bind us together, the end result after 50 years is people who can no longer talk to each other because we no longer have a common frame of reference and we're no longer thinking empirically.
I want to make a statement and I want to read you something. And then we're going to go to Howard, and then we're going to come back and talk a little more. But the U.S. Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, was at Towson University this past week. He joined the new president there, Mark Ginsburg, who happens to be Jewish, and students from Towson, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, Goucher College, to talk about the rise of anti-Semitism. Ginsburg saying, quote, "We have to do everything we can as a community to try to manage this in a way that does not permit a cataclysmic event." Who would like to speak, react to
I mean,
this? Oh, I did say we go to Howard.
Yeah.
We do need to go to Howard, and then we'll be right back.
Rich, I'm sure you've seen some of the Barry Glazer TV commercials. They're different. They get your attention. They also get results. That's why Barry Glazer and his team, including an in-house doctor, make no apologies for getting every penny they can from the insurance companies. So when it comes to personal injury or medical malpractice, there's only one choice. That's Barry Glazer at 410-547-8568. And there's a lot of diners in the Baltimore area, and the most famous of them all are the Double T diners. TT, totally terrific. You're sure to find the best breakfast, lunch, or dinner from Double T's enormous menu selections. There's Double T locations on Route 40, Perry Hall, White Marsh, Bel Air, Laurel, Annapolis, Pasadena, and the EC Diner in Ellicott City. Plus, try By the Docks in Middle River on Monday nights, Lobster Specials on Monday. They're all in the Double T family. Back to you, Richard.
There's, thanks, Hal. There's been a lot of criticism about towards some of the presidents of these colleges and universities who are hesitant to raise the issue or to get behind the battle against anti-Semitism because a lot of their donors happen to be Jewish, and many are pulling back their support of the universities which they attended, which are not doing enough, in their opinion, to fight the anti-Semitism. Next, who wants to get up?
I mean, that's their right. It's their money. They get to, choose how it's deployed.
Sure.
With regard to the students, I think that the vehemence that we're seeing them approach this with is not going to serve them well in their future careers, because they will not, the ones that are prominent and the ones that are most vociferous, they will not, for whatever reason, understand that they can have an issue with Israeli policy. But the way they frame this is to come out in support of Hamas and what occurred on October 7th. You've even got, and I wanted to mention this earlier, and Dan, I'm sure you've seen it, you've got LGBTQ groups coming out in support of Hamas. And it's like, guys, this is chickens for Colonel Sanders, okay? This is not, your interests are not aligned here. So there's this uber emotionalism that I don't think they're looking at the fine points, or as Mary said, trying to actually sit down and study the history of this, which is 5,000 years worth of history. Look, if we were honest about it, no one would be talking about the issue yet, because we'd still be boning up on the history of it.
It's a long and complicated history for sure, and I don't pretend to be an expert in it, but I will say this. Hamas is a terrorist organization who is utilizing the people of Palestine for their own purposes, using them as sacrificial lambs to advance their own agenda. They do not care about the people who are being murdered around them. And I just feel like, I just feel like if people would just for 1 minute, just do a little bit, like dig below the surface and do a little bit of research on your own and understand what these people are all about. It's not really a complicated issue. I mean, these people came over and slaughtered innocent people for no real reason. and are utilizing their own people as human shields, preventing them from going to places where they can escape, ignoring the warnings of the Israelis. I just don't understand what people's thought processes are. And it permeates though everything. Like people, are you thinking and looking and understanding and coming to a knowing conclusion?
Guys, we're getting a little short on time. Try to keep your comments brief if you can. I did want to tell you that at Stanford University, a professor has been removed for minimizing the Holocaust and singling out Jewish students. Dan?
I was going to say, when we were talking before about criticisms of Israel in this, I've been listening to critics of Israel's action, claiming that it's gone too far already. And they've been very careful to say, the ones that I've heard, very careful to say what Mary just said, that Hamas is a terrorist group. There needs to be some separation between our view of the Palestinian people, the people who live in the Gaza Strip, who are just trying to live their lives, versus Hamas. So the criticisms I've heard is that, like, people wonder, like, how far is this going to go? 9,000 deaths? This is like 3 times, 4 times, 5 times as many deaths as occurred in Israel at the hands of Hamas. How far is it going to go? So that's the criticism that I've heard, and the critics I've heard have been very careful to say they don't support Hamas. They support innocent lives in the Gaza Strip, and question how Israel is actually going to pull this off.
Well, listen, it's interesting because I want to tie back together something that Tyrone said, which is the concept of the Bund and the fifth column. I am deeply worried, and I support Israel full-throatedly, and have been on the air talking about, and I refer to the Palestinians as so-called Palestinians for a lot of reasons having to do with the history of the issue. But I am deeply worried that we are on the precipice, and I know this was in the show notes, of a third world war. This is how World War I started. We had issues in Central Europe that spiraled out of control. Then we had a front with the Ottoman Empire in the Arabian Peninsula and the Middle East. And then we didn't have an Asian front, but that could very well happen. So I am deeply, deeply concerned. But there are no great options here. And I know I'll be brief, Richard. I'm sorry. The fact is that unless the Palestinians are willing to give up Hamas to Israel for justice, then there's not a whole heck of a lot that Israel can do in order to remove the threat from Hamas and Hezbollah apart from military action.
Final word from Tyrone Keys.
Well, I know it sounds cliche, pray for peace. The world is a smaller place in the 21st century. We got a lot of great technology, but it seems like our wisdom hasn't progressed, nearly as fast.
We're still at war.
Yeah.
But before we break, and a very good discussion today, very interesting, very good. Dan Rodricks is coming back with his fabulous 2 plays.
Oh.
Dan, 30 seconds, give it a hit.
All right. In December, we have the reprise of my play from last year, Baltimore, You Have No Idea. It's a dramatized memoir from my times at the Baltimore Sun with stories that I've written over the years on stage, dramatized. And then it's small, it's in the small print now. It'll be in large print later. Baltimore Docket, which is a second play in February about the Baltimore courts and the criminal justice system, all, again, based on stories I've covered over the years. So
how do we get tickets, please?
Yeah. Oh, youhavenoidea.org for tickets. And 6 performances in December.
Great. Good luck with those again.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you all, Tyrone, Andrew, Mary, and Dan.
Thanks.
A very good, interesting, stimulating discussion. And we will see you again next week when once again we square off. And by the way, we're also squareoff.net, but now you can see Square Off also at YouTube at Square Off with Richard Sher. See you next time. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Be safe.